and welcome to ESL Revolution, everyone. I'm your content creator and professor, Dr. B. Welcome back to the channel. Boy, have I got a good one for you today. So, before we begin, don't forget, hit that notification button, hit the subscribe button, and you'll be updated Wednesday and Friday, Korea Standard Time, for new videos that will appear. My kids decided that they wanted to be in my video, so they're gonna sit here and they're gonna watch me do this. So, Sumin, June, say hello to YouTube.
Hello.
There we go. Now they'll be quiet for the rest of the time. Okay, so this is the third time actually that I've tried to record this video today, in fact. So hopefully we can get through it. This is another ESL hints and tips video, and it's going to be a continuation of what I have already done. The first video that I did had to do with the idea of speaking fear and the fear of speaking, and especially when you're doing it in another language, how nerve-wracking that can be, and some of the things that you can do in order to reduce the fear of speaking. The second video that I did, which I'm going to link bing, right there, was actually the beginnings of some research explanation that I did specifically on the issue of language acquisition in Korea, because that's where I've been for the last 15 years. And this is especially helpful, I hope, for those people who are teaching in Korea, but also may have some carryover because some of you may be teaching in other Asian countries where this issue might be present. And I want to focus in this one, or in the last video, I talked about some cultural differences between Western and Eastern schools in terms of how students and teachers actually related to each other in the classroom. And just to remind you, basically, it's the difference between a vertical and a horizontal hierarchy, right? In Korea, and I'm going to use Korea as the example, of course, that in Korea is very top-down, very top-down. That is one of the big things in a large part of the culture, not just in the classroom. Whereas there seems to be a tip of the line toward more of a horizontal structure where teachers and students are seen not necessarily as equals, but they are both putting in the effort to do a good job. And they are using each other's conversation, they're using each other's ideas, they're opening up new thought. There's things from the students that encourage the teachers, and the teachers encourage the students. So there's a really big difference in those two structures. And so I want to begin today with a little vignette. And if you've taught in Korea before, this might sound similar. You're an NET, native English teacher, or even a Korean English teacher, and you're in front of the class, you're talking, and you're asking for conversation input, and nothing happens. There's no conversation. Nobody's talking. And what's interesting is you know that some of the students, maybe many of the students, actually know what the answer is, but they're not speaking. Now, this presents a certain level of frustration, doesn't it? Well, I can assure you that as a teacher in Korea, that sure frustrated me. And then, of course, the second part of this story is something to the effect of, Why are the students in a conversation class if they're not having conversation? Now, you might have had something so similar in your mind, such a similar thought. You might have even expressed that thought in a sense of frustration to either the students or to a fellow Korean teacher who is working with you. I know in my past, I've done that. So I know that at my early stages of teaching in Korea, I can assure you that that thought certainly came into my mind. And I can doubly assure you that that thought came out of my mouth. Now, not all is lost if that was the case, because there is a huge cultural difference between what is going on in the classroom. The experiences of a native English teacher in a Korean classroom are so opposite that they're bound to create problems. Now, I'm not going to talk about how to mitigate those today. That's not what this purpose of the video is. However, now that I say that, that might be a good fourth topic, if I can remember that that's what it will actually be. You see, there's something in Korean culture that I think is really, really important to understand. And I've got an article here that is kind of my guide in terms of this particular topic that I've been running with. And I've heard this idea before, but it kind of percolated in my mind once I read the article, and it got me thinking a bit more. Now, the word in Korea, and I might be mispronouncing it, but the word in Korea is chaemyeon. Chaemyeon is is literally the translated word for face. Now, what does that have to do with it? What does your face have to do with what we're talking about? Well, because face is a way of basically, let me put up my other screen here. The idea of face, when you have face, you are seen as having some kind of personal prestige. You have, as the French say, a je ne sais quoi. You have something about you, right? That's face. However, if we lose face, then that prestige diminishes. It goes down. And because of that, in a Korean classroom, when a student has face and they give the wrong answer, or they give a partial answer, or not something that is to the teacher's satisfaction, they lose their face. They lose the prestige. Not just in here, but in the entire environment. The entire class now knows that that student doesn't have face because they didn't know. Now, what's interesting is they actually might know the answer. And yet, when they don't answer, they also lose face. So that is a big issue. You see, it's a double-edged sword. If you answer, and answer incorrectly, you lose face. If you know the answer and you don't answer, you lose face. If you fumble with your answer and it's not to the teacher's satisfaction, you lose face. The student is essentially lost face. Their chaemyeon, and this is probably not the correct word, but they now have an chaemyeon, no face, or a loss of face. Now, an chaemyeon, that's something that I just made up because an is no, chaemyeon is face, so no face. But don't take that literally, of course. It's a figurative way of understanding one's position, one's social standing in a classroom. Now that is a key thing to be considering. Social standing in a classroom. Now we know that in the Korean context, hierarchy is very important. The teacher in the classroom is the penultimate hierarchy, and the students are not physically, literally ranked, but they do have a sense perhaps of what the ranking is in a particular classroom. So when a person who is kind of at the top makes a mistake, their prestige drops because everybody else realizes that person didn't know the answer. And then a person who's near the bottom of the face and their prestige is already low, they lose even more. It's even worse for them. So there's a real catch-22. I either say the wrong answer and I lose face. I say a partial answer and I lose face. Or I don't say anything at all and I still lose face. What are we to do about this? Well, you can see just by that conundrum that is going on, and it's a deep-seated, underlying cultural sense of who they are. Because of that, they might not even be aware of what that is. Now, in my experience, I've taught from elementary school all the way up to university. And I can tell you that that sense of face increases over time. When I teach little kids, they don't have any face at all. They are just open and playful, and they are laughing and having fun. And this goes on for quite a number of years. I've taught even year 5, year 6 students that are having a great time enjoying games and playing and shouting out in my classroom, and I have no problem with that. However, as you get older, that attitude begins to change. One of the things in my experience, and again, I can only say this from my experience, so this might not be in your thinking. Maybe you've done more research on this than I have, so I'm going from an experiential understanding rather than a research understanding on this next statement. But I think one of the reasons why that occurs is because the way that middle school and high school begins to shift your way of doing things in education. Now, why is that? Junhakyo, or middle school, you have to start thinking about what high school you're going to go to, because that is going to have an impact on your ability to have a higher score in your class and hopefully do better on the KSAT, the Korean Standard Scholastic Aptitude Test, and that in turn will hopefully get you into a better university, and that in turn will hopefully get you into a better job. Now you see how that begins to change students' focus. When you're earlier, you're just enjoying the educational system. I can tell because I got 2 kids. Year 2, kindergarten. They love going to school because it's not a pressure cooker. But that pressure cooker does begin. And that pressure cooker begins to change the way that the face, the chaemyeon, begins to operate. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense, perhaps, of how we might be able to understand our students a little bit more in this situation. Now, at present, I'm a university student. A university professor. So I see this idea, this face, a lot at university. In fact, all the time. Because even though they're at university, again, we go back to the hierarchy, and that hierarchy informs students how they ought to behave. Korean students, out of deference and respect to the professor, are most often quiet. Because in a Confucian culture, quiet is respectful. Talking, or giving input, or correcting another student, that is often seen as something that is completely inappropriate for a Korean student to do. So that gives you another sense of that input into the Korean student mind as to what's going on way deep down inside. They might not even be aware of those issues, but culturally it is informing how a Korean student functions and operates in the classroom. Now, there are, of course, rules to the exception. And I think over the last 4 to 5 years, there has been a real concerted effort by the Korean government to begin to walk back some of that academic fear in certain classrooms. And more importantly, a way of trying to engage the students a little bit more. Some success? Possibly. But not nearly what we might need. Now, the other issue that's going on, that I see going on, is the difference between ESL and EFL. Now, I'm going to leave a link to that here because I think that's an important distinction that also needs to be thought out very carefully by the people in higher positions of educational authority. Korea is not an ESL country. Korea never will be an ESL country, which means we as teachers need to change the way that we interact with the language and the way we need to interact with the students. We are an ELL or an EFL country, and by understanding those concepts, we might be able to start changing ourselves as teachers first before we begin to change the students. Again, in my personal experience, my changes and the way that I see myself as a teacher is the number one thing that you can do to make your students more engaged in an English conversation classroom. Anyway, that's all I have to say today. Next week, or on Friday actually, Friday, I'm meeting somebody and helping them out with some other English stuff. So I may not get to a video on Friday, but on the weekend, possibly, I will be putting up the next part of our video series in ESL Tips and Hints. And we're going to continue in this cultural conversation that's going on because I think it is very, very important in order for us to understand that. If you are new to Korea as a teacher, put a comment down below. Let me know, where are you from? How long have you been in Korea? Are you a teacher certified? Or have you come over as a master's student or as a BA student? As a BA, as a degreed student in that regard. Tell me, where are you from? And if you have any questions, by all means, leave a comment below and I'll be glad to help you out. Anyway, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button. We will be in touch. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. B, and don't forget, be the revolution. Peace.